From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. We start in Venezuela, where the opposition coalition has announced it will not take part in the coming presidential election. It says the April 22nd vote is unfair and the process lacks the proper conditions needed to guarantee a transparent result.
We won't participate like this, and we say with all responsibility that our struggle is to achieve conditions to participate in an electoral process.
President Nicolas Maduro has responded to the opposition coalition, saying the election will be held with or without them. He also called for snap legislative elections, proposing to bring them forward by nearly 2 years so they coincide with the presidential poll.
A new National Assembly, a new legislative power that represents the whole country, a National Assembly that works. There will be elections in Venezuela. I'm calling to add the election for the National Assembly to the presidential elections, to anticipate the parliamentary elections, as it's done in Europe and in many places of the world.
Our correspondent Freddie Gillingham has more from the campaign trail in Caracas.
So just to bring you up to speed on some of the election news, it's becoming more contentious by the day, particularly in the opposition camp. Just this week, the MUD coalition, that's the Democratic Unity Roundtable opposition bloc, announced that they will be boycotting the vote on April 22nd. This large bloc includes around 20 opposition parties, including 3 of the main and largest opposition parties, the Democratic Action, Popular Will and Justice First. In contrast to this, a growing coalition of left-wing parties are getting behind the single candidate of Nicolas Maduro. He announced in a press conference just yesterday that he was proposing that a mega election should be taking place in less than 3 months' time on the same day as the presidentials. Now, what is this mega election? Well, it would involve combining the legislative, state and municipal votes on that one day. It would mean that no election would be held after that for the next 4 years. This needs to be passed through the National Constituent Assembly, who have already begun debating on whether that will be put forward. The National Electoral Council announced a few more measures this week. They are inviting a UN delegation to come to observe the vote on April 22nd. That is all we really have time for now. We will bring you up to date later with more news.
Thank you so much for that, Freddie Gillingham. The Venezuelan Foreign Minister, Jorge Arreaza, has arrived in Congo to strengthen international ties. He will meet with his counterpart, Claude Gacoso, and the president of the country. Arreaza was previously in Angola as part of his tour. He called for further collaboration in sustainable energy and the development of human resources. And parts of Buenos Aires have been paralyzed by workers' protests. Truck drivers took to the streets to demonstrate against the government's labor reforms. At the heart of an issue, a cut in pensions and lower subsidies for heating and transport.
These gentlemen don't know that the ones who most want peace in the country is us, the workers. But bringing peace to the country is done with decent salaries, where young people eat with dignity, where families of modest means can feed their children, where workers have a dignified salary. That's what we come to call for, comrades.
In Brazil, the former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, continues his campaign tour throughout the country. He is committed to running in the upcoming presidential elections, despite a conviction and a 12-year prison sentence hanging over his head. Ignacio Limas has more.
Former President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva was in the city of Belo Horizonte, where he said he will be a presidential candidate for the Workers' Party in the upcoming October election, despite his conviction of 12 years in prison imposed by the Porto Alegre court that could forbid him from running for president. Lula said once again that this conviction was a political move to remove him from the ballot ticket, and he says this would be an electoral fraud. He has received the support of several sectors, labor unions, and other left-wing parties for his candidacy. This is the first election to be held after the parliamentary coup against former President Dilma Rousseff. He also said he would continue leading his caravan that began on March 19th through small cities and towns in the southern part of the country, in the states of Rio Grande do Sul, Curitiba, and Santa Catarina. He will also visit Sao Paulo for the 38th anniversary of the Workers' Party.
We thank Ignacio Limas for that report. Colombia's National Liberation Army has accused the government of abandoning peace talks without any real motives. Its chief negotiator, Pablo Beltran, posted a Twitter video claiming the government withdrew from the talks in December without rationale.
First of all, the government didn't appear on February 9th here in Quito, and then argued that we failed to reach an agreement, something that is false. Plus, the verification mechanism for the ceasefire that we defined was not used. From November to mid-December, we made efforts to repair that, but it was not possible.
Beltran said the ELN is still committed to regaining peace. He says his team is ready to restart talks and they're waiting for the government to comply. Security has tightened in Bogota after mobs broke windows and stole food from 16 supermarkets. The government says the stores are fronts hiding assets of the former FARC rebels. Earlier this week, the government said it would confiscate $200 million in property that the FARC did not declare when it signed the peace accord in 2016. FARC was a rebel group which accumulated wealth from organized crime. It is now a reformed political party which has promised to hand over all assets to compensate victims. And what was once a stronghold of FARC rebels is now a playground teeming with wildlife. Researchers in Colombia are discovering new species of plants and animals in swaths of land that were given up by the former rebels. So far, more than 90 new species have been found. They were presented to President Juan Manuel Santos on Wednesday. The discoveries have been given names inspired by the world peace. And we'll take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
México que somos y el México que soñamos. Un México graves los problemas nacionales. El gobierno federal, para cumplir con este propósito, la propuesta inicial
Welcome back. U.S. Democrat lawmakers are in Cuba to try and strengthen relations. They want to normalize ties, a process started by former President Barack Obama. The delegation said it's time to restore staff at the U.S. Embassy in Cuba. It also criticized President Donald Trump's efforts to intensify commercial and financial blockades against the country. And during the talks, Cuba signaled it is close to reforming its currency. The government says its plans to unify the country's two currencies this year because it's distorting the economy. Right now, there's the peso, which is used for wages and local goods. Then there's the convertible peso used in tourism and trade, and it's worth 25 times more than the peso. Cuba has asked the European Union for help with the process. The government of Dominica has organized a seminar to find ways to become the world's first climate-resilient country. That's after Hurricane Maria caused more than $900 million in damage last year. Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit says that climate change is a real threat and the government will launch projects to counter it, but he also asked for cooperation from citizens.
Climate change is real. We're living that reality in the Caribbean. Adapting to that new reality is not an and, if, or maybe. It is a necessity. It is a must.
As Puerto Rico tries to recover from Maria, U.S. officials are saying it is time for the island to rebuild its power system from scratch. The New York Fed president, whose district oversees Puerto Rico, said now is the perfect opportunity to rebuild a resilient power generation and distribution network. But he gave no word on who would fund the project. Maria left 3.5 million people without electricity. Over to Peru now. The campaign for the death penalty for sexual predators of minors has polarized public opinion. While the call for the death sentence is growing, human rights defenders say those crimes can be curbed with changes in education.
There is shock in Peru after 2 girls were raped and killed within the same week. The crime has spurred right-wing politicians to push for the death penalty for sexual abusers of minors, but they are facing opposition.
There has to be a death penalty, at least for rapists. Jails are overcrowded.
These people should not be put in a jail that we are paying for with our taxes.
They should be brought to hospitals where they could also receive psychiatric treatments.
Reports show about 20 women in the country are sexually abused every day. More than 3/4 of them are underage. Feminist organizations are calling for change, but they don't believe in the death penalty as a solution.
I am against the death penalty. I ask how effective this solution can be. We have police, judges, and laws, but the real problem is that we are not following them. The problem is that there is impunity and corruption.
The Ni Una Menos movement, which means not one less, says the problem comes from the structures of society.
People say those who rape children are sick, but it's not always like that. These situations come about because men live in a patriarchal society that has taught them they have the right over a woman's body.
Demus, a non-governmental organization, is demanding the government strengthen sentences for sexual abuse, which is currently capped at 8 years imprisonment. But it says women need to play their part too.
Before we propose the death penalty as a solution, girls need to have access to sexual education as a tool to avoid abuse. They also need to know they need to denounce a rape attempt and that they can involve their parents in their sexual education.
Feminist groups have also rejected powerful conservative groups, who they say are partially responsible for gender violence because of their high-flying notions of power and authority.
Archbishop Charles Chicluna, the Pope's envoy to investigate the accusation of sexual abuse cover-up in Chile, is successfully recovering from gallbladder surgery. He was hospitalized shortly after beginning interviews with victims of sexual abuse. He said the meetings will continue this week as other priests are taking charge of the investigation into Bishop Juan Barrios. Chicluna tweeted a photo with 2 priests and thanked those who prayed for his recovery. It's been more than a week since the revelry of Carnival wrapped up, but the issues raised during the annual festival continue to stir controversy. In Trinidad, lawmakers and others are debating about the issue of consent.
Carnival has been described as a euphoric experience. The freedom displayed with dancing and fancy costumes can read as exotic or sexy to foreign eyes, but it's considered the norm in Trinidad. But perhaps that is changing because this year, local police reminded masqueraders and partiers that whining without consent can get you in trouble. Whining is a dance. The choreographer, Sonia Dumas, describes it as either a rotation, a gyration, or an oscillation of the pelvic region, usually done in rhythmic style to music in a festive or recreational environment. The carnival-themed conversation about consent was perfectly encapsulated by Mandisa Grandison, who has this to say about the challenges facing women who want to whine either with or without company at her choosing.
These men propose to tell me that if, as a woman or any woman who also knew on Carnival, if she ever come out to wine with man, she is to stay home. Now, problematic at best, right? I was like, and I tried all kinds of logic, all kinds of reasoning, and these dudes were like, no, it's Carnival, that the culture, you had to come out and what man want to ting, and I was like, so you are saying that it's Carnival, and therefore my bottom for those 2 days becomes what, public property for public consumption?
In recent years, Trinidad's Carnival has become the launching pad for a very Caribbean discussion of sexuality and gender relations. The answers have not been easy to come by, and the conversation is continuing.
Now, to help us discuss the issues of consent in Carnival and the role of women in the festival, we're being joined by soca star and multiple Road March winner, Fayan Lyons Alvarez. Hello, Fayan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, the Me Too movement was really big in the United States, and then this year for Carnival, the police reminded people that you needed consent before you can whine on someone. Do you think that Trinidad is jumping on an American bandwagon, or did we need to talk about consent in our Carnival and before whining?
I think we needed to talk about consent and respect overall. Bandwagon or no bandwagon, at the end of the day, respect for women is something that should be adhered to worldwide. I know we have a lot of people saying, you know, it's Carnival, it's the festivities, it's the norm, but we have to be mindful that not every woman that steps out in the street is going to enjoy the Carnival or wants to participate in the Carnival like every other woman. So some women might be fine with random men dancing on them and continuing with the norm, but you'll find that there are women that are naturally coming out to just enjoy the sights, watch the masqueraders, and have a good time without having to be bothered by men grouping on them and touching.
And you have a very strong personality. I've noticed you stay wear the hashtag. As a woman in soca, how free are you to be who you are, to own your sound, your look, your sexuality? Or do you feel that we, the audience, or even the industry, limits your freedom of expression?
Well, that is part of the Stay Away campaign that I'm on. For me, I've been through the pressures of trying to fit in a box that society, people, fans, your family, friends think that you should fit in because you're a woman, because you're an artist, because it's never been done, because you're supposed to look a particular way, because you are a particular type of artist. And for me, I've always resisted all those stereotypes. For me, it's about finding who you are, living in your truth, standing in your own presence and not having to try to fit into whose presence you're in on any particular day. Because you'll be in front of somebody on Monday and they want you to be a particular way. Tuesday, you'll meet somebody else, they don't like the way you were Monday. You need to change for the people that you're in front of Tuesday. It doesn't make sense. That's how you have people depressed and upset and just being recluse from society. So for me, it's always been figure out who you are, show the world that person. And whoever loves you for that, genuine people love it.
Thank you so much, Fayan Lyons. We've been talking to Fayan Lyons Alvarez, major soca star and multiple Road March and Soca Monarch winner, about gender and sexuality and the culture that we have in the Caribbean Carnival. Thank you so much, Fayan, for joining us. Other news now. El Salvador celebrated International Mother Language Day this week, and its people took the opportunity to remember the importance of their native language, Nahut.
Children sing the El Salvadorian national anthem in the Nahut language. They are native of Santo Domingo de Guzman, one of the country's municipalities where 70% of Nahuatl speakers live.
Unfortunately, Nahuatl in El Salvador is losing ground. It's near a sad extinction. Currently, we can only find Nahuatl native speakers in 4 municipalities in eastern El Salvador. 3 are in Sonsonate and 1 in Ajuchapan. They are Tacuba, Cuisnahuatl, Nahuizalco, and Santo Domingo de Guzman. And this is why Santo Domingo de Guzman is becoming the capital of Nahuatl.
The Mesoamerican region has been influenced by the Nahuatl language. It came from Mexico until Nicaragua. According to anthropologists, the language was used to evangelize indigenous people. Santo Domingo celebrates 2 festivities: the International Mother Language Day and the National Nahuatl Language Day.
It's a language that was transmitted through the migrations of Nahuatl groups that came from central Mexico and populated this territory between the 8th and 13th century.
Dionisia Garcia explains to us in her language how she works with clay to make kitchen and decorative utensils. It's a tradition that she keeps along with her language. It contributes to maintain her ancestral culture.
We work with the clay, but in Nahuatl we call it sugit. This clay maintains us because we survive from this, because it's what God gave us. Remember, we came from the mud.
Hilario Garcia gathers words and sentences of the Nahuatl language in a 100-page notebook, with the purpose of giving it to the new generations.
What I wish is that the kids learn, and not only here in Santo Domingo, but also all over the country. There are people from San Miguel that have asked me about this book.
The International Mother Language Day was stated by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization in 1999. In El Salvador, Nahuatl is the only ancestral language that stands. This is why it has been declared intangible cultural heritage.
Time now for another short break. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Now let's take a look at what's making headlines around the world.
In a meeting with the survivors of the Florida school shooting at the White House on Wednesday, President Donald Trump suggested that arming teachers could help prevent school shootings. Students, parents and teachers shared their ordeals with the president and made emotional pleas for the government to take stricter action to prevent such massacres.
School teachers have more than enough responsibilities right now than to have the awesome responsibility of lethal force to take a life. Thank you. Nobody wants to see a shootout in a school,
The Nigerian army says they have rescued 76 girls who were allegedly kidnapped by the Boko Haram militants earlier this week in the northeastern state of Yobe. Around 100 girls were missing after Boko Haram attacked a school and forcibly took them away on trucks. At least 2 students were found dead, according to government officials. This is the second biggest kidnapping by the notorious group after they kidnapped more than 270 Chibok girls in 2014. In a first-of-its-kind census in France, the humanitarian organization SAMU Social discovered at least 3,000 people sleep on the streets of Paris. More than 1,000 volunteers and officials carried out the census last week, visiting every street and counting people sleeping in the open.
In Paris, there are lots more homeless people in many minor districts than in the really touristic streets. Often they are hidden because they are ashamed. It's about saying, they exist, they are there, there's not good brushing them aside.
Also in France, Air France pilots, cabin crew and ground staff are on a strike to demand a 6% pay increase and improved working conditions. The strike has affected more than half of their long-haul flights out of Paris. Overall, the strikes could hit 26% of all Air France flights. The workers have been upset with years of job reductions and other cost-cutting measures.
300 illuminated drones put on a spectacular show in China as the nation continues to celebrate the Lunar New Year. A fleet of synchronized drones with built-in LEDs flew high in the air in various formations. They included caricatures of the Chinese god of wealth and many other Spring Festival-themed animations. The entire drone performance was controlled by a single computer. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.